The Whispered Revelation, a party that unraveled my marriage. Don't forget to like this story, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. The music pulsed with a vibrant energy, a rhythmic heartbeat against the backdrop of lively chatter and the clinking of glasses. The warm, honeyed glow of the chandelier cast soft, dancing light across the elegantly appointed room, illuminating faces flushed with laughter and the rich hues of overflowing wine glasses. It was one of those gatherings that struck the perfect balance between sophisticated and relaxed, a collection of close friends, indulging in good food and even better company. My husband, Daniel, a familiar figure across the room, was deeply engrossed in a conversation with a colleague, his brow furrowed in concentration. I stood near the crackling warmth of the fireplace, a half-full glass of Merlot cradled in my hand, a genuine smile gracing my lips as I shared a laugh with my dear friend, Lisa. And then I felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a presence drawing near, close but not intrusive. I turned slightly, anticipating another friend or acquaintance joining our convivial circle. Instead, my gaze met the steady, knowing eyes of Eric. Eric had been Daniel's friend for years, one of his closest confidants. He was always impeccably polite, possessing that effortless charm that made him a welcome guest at any gathering. Yet, our interactions had always remained within the comfortable confines of polite small talk, fleeting exchanges amidst the larger social landscape. Tonight, however, there was a palpable difference in his demeanor, a subtle intensity that set him apart. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur that barely carried above the ambient noise, a secret whisper directly into my ear. "You have no idea, do you?" I blinked, caught completely off guard by the unexpected intimacy of his approach and the enigmatic nature of his words. "No idea about what?" I asked, striving to keep my tone light and conversational, masking the sudden flutter of unease that had taken root in my chest. His eyes held mine for a fleeting moment, studying my face with an unnerving intensity, as if he were wrestling with an internal debate about whether to reveal more. Then, a small, knowing smile played on his lips, a subtle curve that sent a strange, unexpected ripple of awareness through me. "About the way people look at you. The way you carry yourself. You'd light up a room without even trying." A warmth bloomed in my cheeks, an involuntary blush that surprised even me. I laughed softly, attempting to brush off his words with a light-hearted dismissal. "That's just the wine talking." But he shook his head slowly, his gaze unwavering. "No, it's not." There was something undeniably unsettling about the way he said it, not in a threatening or inappropriate manner, but in a way that suddenly made me hyper-aware of myself, of him, of the charged space that had inexplicably sprung up between us. I hadn't felt such a potent awareness in years, not since the early days of my courtship with Daniel, when every glance held a spark of new discovery. I glanced across the room towards my husband, still deeply engrossed in his conversation, oblivious to the intimate moment unfolding just a few feet away. Eric stepped back slightly, as if realizing he had ventured too far into uncharted territory. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, a slight, almost apologetic chuckle in his voice. "I'm not uncomfortable," I replied, the words escaping my lips before I could fully process them. And that was the surprising truth. I was taken aback, yes, but there was something about the sincerity in his voice, the quiet confidence in his gaze, that had stirred something within me, a long-dormant ember flickering back to life. Lisa, thankfully oblivious to the charged exchange that had just transpired, gently pulled me back into her conversation, her laughter a welcome anchor in the sudden storm brewing within me. I forced myself to smile, to offer appropriate responses to her anecdotes, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Eric's whispered words. He had never spoken to me like that before, never looked at me with such focused attention. And yet, I couldn't deny the unexpected warmth that had bloomed within me, the subtle validation that had resonated deep within. I wasn't sure what to do with this unsettling realization. The party continued its lively course, and I tried to shake off the lingering feeling, to immerse myself back into the familiar comfort of the gathering. But no matter how many times I sipped my wine, how heartily I laughed at a joke, or how animatedly I joined a conversation, I kept feeling Eric's eyes on me. Not in a way that felt predatory or inappropriate, but simply present, attentive. At one point, I excused myself, needing a momentary escape to the cool night air of the patio. The night was still, the distant hum of traffic a barely perceptible murmur against the quiet intimacy of the space. I leaned against the railing, taking a slow, deliberate breath, hoping to clear the sudden fog that had descended upon my thoughts. "Are you okay?" I turned, and of course, it was Eric. A wry smile touched my lips as I shook my head slightly. "Just needed a break from all the noise." He nodded, stepping up beside me, his hands resting casually on the railing, the proximity sending another unexpected shiver down my spine. "You seem different tonight." I glanced at him, a silent question in my eyes. "Different how?" He hesitated, his gaze sweeping over my face before settling back on my eyes. Like you're remembering something you forgot about yourself." His words settled over me like a tangible weight, a profound observation that struck a chord deep within. For a moment, I couldn't find a response, the truth of his statement echoing in the sudden silence. Was I? I had been married for 20 years, a comfortable, enduring partnership built on shared history and mutual respect. I loved Daniel. He was a good man, a good husband. But somewhere along the winding path of raising children, navigating demanding careers, and settling into the predictable rhythm of everyday life, I had stopped feeling seen. Not in the way Eric had just seen me, with that focused, almost reverent attention. And that realization, that quiet acknowledgement of a forgotten part of myself, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Eric must have sensed the internal turmoil his words had ignited, because he took a subtle step back, creating a small but significant space between us. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. I think sometimes we all need to be reminded of who we are." I exhaled slowly, turning to face him fully, the cool night air a stark contrast to the sudden heat that had flared between us. "And who do you think I am, Eric?" His eyes searched mine for a long, intense moment, a silent exploration that seemed to delve into the very depths of my being. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that held a quiet admiration. "Someone worth noticing." A shiver ran through me, not from the chill of the night, but from something deeper, something primal and long dormant that I couldn't quite name. Before I could formulate a response, the door behind us opened, and Daniel's familiar voice called out, "Hey, there you are. I was looking for you." I turned quickly, the charged moment between Eric and me vanishing in an instant, replaced by the familiar comfort of my husband's presence. I smiled at Daniel, my safe place, my anchor. "Just getting some air." Daniel walked over, pressing a light, affectionate kiss to my forehead. "Come back inside. They're about to bring out dessert." I nodded, slipping my hand into his, the warmth of his touch a familiar reassurance. As we walked back inside, I risked one last glance at Eric. He was watching me, his expression unreadable in the soft light, and in that moment, a deep, intuitive knowing settled within me, this night wasn't over yet. The subtle shift in the atmosphere, the whispered revelation, had planted a seed that was beginning to take root. The energy of the party had subtly shifted by the time Daniel and I returned indoors. The arrival of dessert had drawn people towards the large, opulent table that had been set up in the center of the room, laden with an array of tempting treats. The sweet, intoxicating scent of chocolate and vanilla filled the air, mingling with the lingering notes of wine and the soft glow of candlelight. Laughter echoed through the space as guests indulged in slices of decadent cake and shared animated stories. But the convivial warmth of the gathering did little to dispel the strange, almost magnetic energy that had settled between Eric and me. I tried to focus on the conversations around me, my husband animatedly discussing work with a colleague, Lisa recounting a hilarious anecdote about her children. But it was as if an invisible thread connected Eric and me, a silent pull that kept my awareness tethered to his presence just beyond the periphery of my vision. And every time I stole a glance, I saw him watching me. Not overtly, not in a way that would draw attention, but his eyes were always there, following my movements, lingering for just a moment too long, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken connection between us. It was undeniably unsettling, a subtle violation of the comfortable boundaries of our friendship, and yet, there was also something strangely, undeniably thrilling about it, a forbidden awareness that sent a nervous flutter through my stomach. Seeking a momentary respite from the swirling emotions, I excused myself to the bathroom, the rhythmic click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor echoing in the sudden quiet of the hallway. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, pressing my palms against the cool wood, a silent attempt to ground myself. What was happening? It wasn't just the words he had whispered earlier, or the way he had leaned in close in that quiet corner of the patio. It was this persistent feeling, this undeniable tension that had settled in the air between us, as if some invisible, unspoken bond had been forged. I hadn't felt such a potent awareness in years, a visceral connection that transcended mere politeness. I couldn't explain it. It was like I was suddenly seeing myself through someone else's eyes, and not just anyone's, Eric's eyes. It was a strange, heady mix of validation and profound confusion. I had spent years immersed in the comfortable routine of my marriage, and had all but forgotten what it felt like to be seen in such a way, to be noticed not just for what I did, but for who I was, the essence of my being. I shook my head, trying to clear the burgeoning thoughts from my mind. This wasn't like me. I was married. I loved Daniel. But why did it feel like something long dormant was stirring deep within me, awakened by Eric's unexpected gaze? As I stepped out of the bathroom, the quiet solitude shattered by an unexpected encounter. Eric was leaning against the wall, as if he had been waiting for me, his posture relaxed but his eyes intensely focused on mine. I took a breath, intending to walk past him with a polite nod, but he stepped forward, just a fraction, enough to subtly block my path. "Hey," he said softly, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to vibrate in the quiet hallway. I hesitated, my heart inexplicably beating a little faster than usual. There was something in his tone, a quiet intensity, that made me stop, even when every instinct urged me to keep walking, to retreat to the safety of the crowd. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile that felt strained and unnatural. "Just needed a moment." He didn't move, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know." The words hung in the air between us, thick and charged, the unspoken truth of our shared awareness creating an almost palpable tension. I could feel the heat of the moment, the weight of his gaze pressing against me, but I didn't know how to respond, how to navigate this unexpected intimacy. "Eric, I began, but the words caught in my throat, an unformed jumble of conflicting emotions. "I've known you for years, Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest, "and I don't think I've ever seen you this alive." His words hit me harder than I expected, a stark and unsettling observation. Alive. Had I really become so lost in the daily grind, in the roles of wife, mother, friend, that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be, to feel something beyond the demands of my responsibilities? I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I don't know what you mean." He stepped a fraction closer, and I felt the space between us shrink, the air growing warmer with each passing second. He was close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of his breath, steady and deliberate. "I mean," he began, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken, "that I've always known you were someone special. But tonight, you're radiating something else. Something I can't quite name, but I can feel it. It's magnetic." His words, the raw sincerity in them, took my breath away. I had never seen Eric like this. He was always the charming, friendly guy, a comfortable presence in our social circle. But this was different. It was as if he was seeing something in me that I hadn't even known was there, a hidden spark that had suddenly been ignited. I took a small, involuntary step back, feeling the weight of his gaze and the undeniable heat of the moment. "Eric, Just then, the door to the living room swung open again, and Daniel's voice, laced with a hint of concern, called out, "Sarah? Everything okay?" I blinked, breaking the intense trance that had held us captive. I hadn't even realized how much I had been leaning towards Eric, how much closer he had gotten without my conscious awareness. I cleared my throat, straightening up, trying to regain a semblance of composure. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just getting some fresh air." Eric gave a subtle nod, stepping back slightly, his expression unreadable in the dim hallway light. But I saw something there, a fleeting emotion I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps disappointment, perhaps something more complex. "All right," he said softly, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment longer. "I'll let you get back to Daniel." I didn't know what to say, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air between us. So, I simply nodded, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile before quickly turning and walking back towards the living room, leaving Eric standing alone in the quiet hallway. As I rejoined Daniel and the others, forcing a smile and pretending that nothing untoward had occurred, the truth was undeniable: nothing felt the same anymore. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the chatter, the music, the laughter all seeming distant and muffled, as if I were observing everything unfold from behind a frosted window. I couldn't stop replaying the encounter with Eric in my mind, his whispered words, the intensity of his gaze. It was as if a spark of something unexpected had been lit within me, and now I wasn't sure how, or even if, I wanted to extinguish it. As the night wore on, another unsettling thought began to creep into my consciousness: perhaps it wasn't something I could extinguish. The next few days drifted by in a hazy blur, the memory of the party feeling like a distant, almost dreamlike sequence, a momentary spark that had briefly illuminated a hidden corner of my heart before fading back into the routine of my life. I tried to shake off the strange pull I had felt after that night, to consciously retreat back to the familiar comfort of my marriage, to the predictable rhythm of my life as it had been before Eric's whispered words and that unsettling, knowing look. But I couldn't. Each time I closed my eyes, Eric's face would materialize in the darkness, his eyes intense and searching, his voice echoing in the quiet recesses of my mind: "You're radiating something else. Something magnetic." I couldn't escape it. It was as if a part of me, long dormant, had suddenly awakened, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a subtle yearning for something I hadn't even consciously realized was missing. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, an innocent compliment amplified by the late hour and the wine. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. There was an undeniable undercurrent, something deeper, something that both scared and excited me in equal measure. It was so subtle, so carefully hidden beneath the surface of everyday life, but it was undeniably there, a silent tension that seemed to build incrementally each time our paths crossed. It was in the way he looked at me when no one else was paying attention, a lingering gaze that held a silent acknowledgement. It was in the quiet conversations we had, brief exchanges about the weather or mutual friends, where he seemed to notice every little detail about me, things that no one else did. And it was in the way he made me feel alive, seen, like I was more than just a wife, more than just a mother. But it wasn't just about Eric. It was about me too. I had spent so many years being defined by my roles: wife, mother, friend, that I had gradually lost touch with the core of who I really was. Somewhere along the way, Sarah had become synonymous with a series of responsibilities and expectations. But Eric, in his own unexpected way, had reminded me of who I could be, of the woman I used to be before life became a series of check boxes and predictable routines. And I couldn't deny that it felt good. It was a subtle validation, a quiet recognition of a self I had almost forgotten. It was a Saturday morning when the familiar sense of unease resurfaced with a renewed intensity. Daniel and I were in the kitchen, engaged in the familiar ritual of making breakfast together. It was one of those rare, lazy mornings, the kind we used to cherish before our lives became increasingly crowded with work deadlines and the demands of raising children. The radio played softly in the background, a gentle melody accompanying our comfortable silence, and we were sharing a quiet laugh about something silly, a familiar intimacy that usually brought me a sense of peace. But as I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, I noticed that familiar sense of restlessness building inside me again, an inexplicable yearning that tugged at the edges of my contentment. I tried to push it away, to focus on the simple pleasure of the morning, but my mind kept drifting back to that night, to Eric's whispered words, to the unsettling awareness he had awakened within me. "Everything all right, love?" Daniel asked, his voice pulling me back to the present moment. I offered a weak smile, trying to push the intrusive thoughts aside. "Yeah, just a little distracted. Nothing serious." But Daniel, my husband of 2 decades, knew me too well. He gave me a knowing look, a subtle narrowing of his eyes that conveyed his unspoken awareness that something was amiss. "You sure?" He pressed gently, his gaze holding a quiet concern. I hesitated, the internal conflict a palpable tension within me. Should I tell him? Should I try to articulate the unsettling impact of Eric's words, the unexpected feelings they had stirred? But the thought of disrupting the fragile peace of our morning, of introducing a complication that felt both nebulous and potentially devastating, stayed my tongue. I loved Daniel. The thought of causing him pain, of making him question the foundation of our life together based on a fleeting connection and a whispered compliment, felt unbearable. "I'm fine," I said, striving for a tone of convincing normalcy. "Just thinking about some work stuff. You know how it is." Daniel seemed to accept my explanation, offering a reassuring nod before turning back to stirring the scrambled eggs. But my mind continued its relentless race. The more I tried to suppress the intrusive thoughts, the stronger they became. And the more I inadvertently encountered Eric in the subsequent days, a chance meeting at the local coffee shop, a brief exchange at a community event, the more I recognized a disquieting truth, something I wasn't yet ready to fully admit to myself, let alone voice to another soul. I was drawn to him. It wasn't just the novelty of his words, it was the way he made me feel, truly seen, appreciated for something beyond my roles, a spark of recognition that had been absent for far too long. It was a dangerous realization, a subtle shift in my emotional landscape that threatened the very foundation of my marriage. Later that afternoon, seeking a momentary escape from the suffocating weight of my thoughts, I went to the grocery store to pick up a few necessities. As I navigated the crowded aisles, my cart rattling softly, I ran into Eric. He was alone, carefully selecting some ripe tomatoes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He turned as I approached, that familiar quiet smile gracing his lips, and for a fleeting, disorienting moment, it felt like time stood still, the bustling supermarket fading into a blurred background. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice a low murmur just for me, a private acknowledgement in the public space. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I couldn't help but return his smile, a nervous flutter in my chest betraying my carefully constructed composure. "What are you doing here?" "Just picking up a few things," he replied, his eyes holding mine for a beat longer than necessary. "I've got a barbecue at my place later. You guys coming?" I nodded, the automatic response feeling strangely detached from the internal turmoil I was experiencing. "We're planning to. Daniel's looking forward to it." Eric's eyes softened, and I saw that fleeting spark again, that unspoken connection that seemed to bridge the gap between our carefully constructed realities. "Good," he said quietly, his gaze holding a weight that belied the casual nature of his words. "I'll see you there then." He lingered for a moment longer, and I could feel the intensity of his gaze on me, a silent conversation passing between us, a shared awareness of the unspoken feelings that hung heavy in the air. I didn't know what to say, the complexities of the situation leaving me momentarily speechless. So, I simply nodded and offered a small, almost imperceptible smile before quickly moving on, my grocery cart rattling a hasty retreat. But as I walked down the aisle, the mundane task of grocery shopping suddenly imbued with a heightened sense of drama, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What was happening? Why was this unexpected feeling growing stronger, more insistent, with each passing encounter? That evening, as Daniel and I arrived at Eric's barbecue, the air crackled with an almost palpable tension, at least from my perspective. I could feel it in the forced lightness of my laughter, in the way my eyes instinctively sought out Eric's across the crowded yard. Every time our paths crossed, a fleeting brush of arms, a brief exchange of polite greetings, it felt as if there was an invisible magnetic pull between us, a force we both tried to ignore but couldn't entirely escape. And then, as the night wore on, fueled by the easy camaraderie of friends and the mellowing effects of wine, the moment arrived, the inevitable point where the unspoken could no longer remain hidden. Eric was standing by the grill, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across his face as he expertly flipped burgers. He glanced up, his eyes meeting mine across the noisy gathering, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the rest of the world faded into a muted background. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the laughter and music, a private message carried on the warm evening air. "I need to talk to you." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening in anticipation and a growing sense of dread. I had a feeling, a deep, intuitive knowing, of what was coming. I took a hesitant step closer, the festive atmosphere around us suddenly feeling alien and distant. My breath caught in my throat. "What is it?" His gaze never wavered, holding mine with an intensity that made my knees feel weak. "I can't stop thinking about you. About us. I need to know if you feel it too." The words hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, jarring impact that stole the air from my lungs. The world around me seemed to blur, the sounds of the party fading into a muffled hum, And for a disorienting moment, all I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. Did I feel it too? The question echoed in the silent chambers of my mind, a broken record refusing to let go. For a paralyzing moment, I stood frozen, caught in the complex web of my emotions, the suddenness of Eric's direct confession, the unexpected tenderness in his voice, the undeniable heat in his gaze. And then, just as quickly as it had surged, doubt began to creep in, a cold wave of reality washing over the intoxicating pull of the moment. I glanced around, desperately seeking some distraction, anything to break the suffocating tension. But the faces of friends and family continued to laugh and mingle, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing in my chest. Daniel was somewhere across the yard, his familiar silhouette outlined against the soft glow of the patio lights, chatting with a neighbor, completely oblivious to the silent turmoil unfolding between Eric and me. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," Eric's voice broke through my chaotic thoughts, low and tinged with regret. He stopped himself, shaking his head slightly, a gesture of self-reproach. "I didn't want to ruin things, but I had to know if you felt the same." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with a mix of conflicting emotions. "Eric, Before I could finish the hesitant sentence, he took a small step back, his expression softening with a quiet understanding. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't have said anything. It's just when I'm around you, I can't help but feel something. I thought maybe you felt it too." His voice was a quiet whisper now, a vulnerable mix of longing and raw honesty. I could see the internal conflict in his eyes, the visible struggle between what was right and what his heart undeniably desired. And in that moment, a profound realization struck me, a truth that shook me to my very core: this wasn't just about Eric anymore. It was about me. My feelings. My choices. For years, I had been so completely caught up in what I was supposed to do, who I was supposed to be, that I had forgotten to listen to the quiet whispers of my own heart. The well-defined roles of wife and mother had gradually consumed me, and I had allowed them to define the entirety of my being. But now, standing in front of Eric, bathed in the flickering light of the barbecue, I felt something stirring deep within me, a longing I had buried long ago, a yearning for a self I had almost forgotten. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my voice before finally speaking. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, the words trembling slightly on the warm night air. "I love Daniel. I do. But you make me feel seen in a way I haven't felt in years." Eric's expression softened further, his gaze searching mine with an almost desperate intensity, as though he was seeking an answer, a confirmation, in the depths of my eyes. "I get it," he said quietly, his voice laced with a gentle understanding. "I never wanted to complicate your life, Sarah. But you deserve to feel alive. To feel wanted. You've been so strong for so long, for everyone else. But what about you? What do you want?" The question hung between us, raw and unspoken, a direct challenge to the comfortable complacency I had allowed to define my existence. What did I want? I had spent so many years being what everyone else needed me to be that I didn't even know how to answer. But I knew one thing, a certainty that resonated deep within my soul: this moment was mine. The choice, however difficult, was ultimately mine to make. "I need to think," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the internal chaos. "I need to figure out what all of this means." Eric nodded, stepping back a little, his face respectful, devoid of any pressure. "Take your time, Sarah. I won't push you. I needed you to know." With that, he turned and walked back towards the grill, his broad back turned towards me as the full weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. Later that evening, as Daniel and I drove home, the comfortable silence between us now imbued with an unspoken tension, I kept replaying the conversation with Eric in my mind. His words, the palpable unspoken tension, the raw, undeniable feeling that had sparked between us. And the question that still lingered, unanswered, in the quiet corners of my heart: what now? Back at home, I slipped into bed beside Daniel, the familiar warmth of his body next to mine a stark contrast to the cool, restless thoughts swirling in my head. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close, a gesture of affection that usually brought comfort, but tonight felt both familiar and strangely distant. My mind was elsewhere, caught in the emotional aftermath of everything that had happened. "Everything okay, love?" Daniel murmured, his voice soft with sleepiness and a hint of concern. I nodded, forcing a reassuring smile into the darkness. "Yeah. Just a little tired." He kissed my forehead, a routine gesture that in that moment felt both comforting and profoundly detached. But I knew, deep down, that I stood at a precipice, a critical juncture. My life, my marriage, everything I thought I knew was subtly shifting, the solid ground beneath my feet beginning to tremble. The road ahead was uncertain, shrouded in a fog of unanswered questions, but I couldn't ignore the unexpected path that had suddenly opened before me, a path illuminated by a whispered confession and the unsettling echo of a long-forgotten desire. The next few days passed in a disorienting blur, each moment feeling like a heavy step towards something I couldn't quite name, a future that felt both terrifying and exhilarating in its uncertainty. I went through the motions of my days, tending to the familiar responsibilities of home and family, but beneath the carefully constructed surface of normalcy, everything had irrevocably changed. And then, finally, facing the undeniable truth that had taken root in my heart, I found the courage to confront the growing chasm between my outward existence and my inner turmoil. I sat down with Daniel one quiet evening, the silence of our living room amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. He deserved honesty. He deserved the truth, however painful. "Daniel," I began, my voice trembling slightly, the words catching in my throat. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his book, his brow furrowing with a flicker of concern in his familiar eyes. "What's going on, Sarah?" I took a deep breath, gathering the scattered fragments of my courage. "I've been struggling with something. Something I should have told you about sooner." I hesitated, the weight of my confession pressing down on me. "Eric. He said something to me at the party. And it made me realize that I've been neglecting a part of myself. A part of me that's been buried for a long time." Daniel's expression softened, his gaze now filled with a quiet attentiveness. "What did he say?" The words felt like a betrayal as they finally escaped my lips, a whispered admission into the quiet of our home. "He said he couldn't stop thinking about me. And the truth is, Daniel, I've been thinking about him too." A long, heavy silence descended upon the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I could see the hurt dawning in Daniel's eyes, a shadow of pain replacing the familiar warmth. But there was no anger, no immediate bitterness, just a profound sadness. "I don't know what this means for us, Daniel," I continued, my voice shaking with unshed tears, "but I needed you to know." Daniel took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, his gaze distant, as if he were looking inward, processing the weight of my confession. "I understand, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a weary resignation. I think I've seen this coming. Maybe not the specifics. But the distance between us. It's been there for a while." His words, though painful to hear, held a strange sense of release. I wasn't alone in this quiet drifting apart. "We've both been growing in different directions," Daniel continued, his gaze finally meeting mine, a sad understanding in his eyes. Maybe it's time for us to figure out what that means." And in that moment, amidst the quiet devastation of my confession and Daniel's heartbreakingly honest response, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about Eric, not entirely. It wasn't even solely about the fleeting spark that had ignited between us. It was about me, about finally acknowledging the long-neglected needs of my own soul, about rediscovering who I was beyond the comfortable confines of my marriage. As the days that followed unfolded, marked by difficult conversations, tearful admissions, and the raw vulnerability of confronting a shared history, I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of profound doubt, the sharp sting of guilt, and the arduous process of redefining a relationship that had once felt unbreakable. But I was ready. I was ready to reclaim my own journey, wherever it might lead. And as for Eric, the future remained uncertain, a landscape of unspoken possibilities. But one thing was clear, the story wasn't over. The chapters were still being written, and whatever came next, I was determined to face it with honesty, courage, and an open heart. Because sometimes, you have to let go of the life you've known to embrace the uncertain but potentially transformative promise of the life that's waiting for you.